Select Board meeting, August 28th, called to order at this time. The first item we're going to discuss is Scott Hardy's request for a highway access permit on Mount Philo Road. Who would like to speak to that?
Yes, so this is we had a request prior, and because of the lapse of the filing of Mylar on time, we had to, or maybe this isn't jointed, maybe these, I think maybe these highway access permits have a certain amount of time before they go stale, so it's just a reapplication of a prior application, a prior approval.
So everything is the same as the approval that
We had
was
prior.
about 2 years ago, is that right?
Right, just no development had been done, so we
So
had
it's
no
a
use.
new application because the time had elapsed?
Right.
Okay. Do you want to make a motion?
Sure. I'll make a motion to approve the highway access permit HAP 17-09 and HAP 17-10 at 783 Mount Philo Road.
I'll second it.
Any discussion? So there are two, you just did 9, right? There's 9 and 10?
I did 9 and 10.
Okay.
Yep. And you got Junior's. Yeah, he said conditions haven't changed, no culvert is needed, and the site distance is approximately 500 feet in both directions, which is sufficient for the speed limit, which is 45 miles an hour posted.
Everybody ready to vote?
Yeah.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
You're good. That was easier than the other 2 visits.
Enjoy your
Yeah, we are looking forward to it. Anna Nadeau, you're here? How much you come forward? Hello, welcome.
Thank you.
So you want to just give us 1 minute on what you're proposing to do?
Yes, please. We'd like to have Comcast service in our home, Mary Lighthouse Old Residence. It requires excavation under the road, under Hills Point Road.
So you left us with a chart, so that's going under the road, then it goes on your property?
Right. It goes from a telephone pole on the other side of the road, under the road, and onto our property.
So they don't do that as a service for you?
They do it.
Oh, they will do it,
Yeah.
you just have to
We
get
just
permit
need
to...
permission from you guys.
I see.
It's going under the town road. So we have a license agreement that allows it to be there. It would require, if we need to do anything to the road, it would have to be potentially relocated, but that's unlikely. It gives basically the town the right to relocate it, but it indemnifies the town for any issues.
And Junior's fine with those? I read there's a 4-foot...
Yeah, distance between surface and the cables.
It had the holes on either side were a certain amount.
25 feet off the travel portion.
Okay. Is there a motion?
Sure. I'll make a motion to approve the license for Anna Nadeau to install a telecommunication line under Hills Point Road at 613 Hills Point.
Okay. Is that seconded?
I guess I should say subject to the conditions of the road commissioner.
Now, is this for just,
We need a second.
okay, I'll second it.
Okay.
But I was just wondering, it's for the revocable trust. Does this have to be, should that be part of the motion? Should it be to both, or?
Well, I noticed that there's, to your point, there are 2 co-trustees. Did I read that right, or did I mixing something up? No? Okay.
Well, it says co-trustee on this.
It's me and Mom.
Oh,
Yeah.
gotcha.
She's
Oh, you and your mother?
Right.
Okay.
not here.
Gotcha. Okay.
but thank you.
Any other discussion on this?
Dean, you're gonna have a poll number,
Yes, it's number 12.
okay? To be put into the agreement.
Okay.
I guess that's all I've got.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll take that.
What we do is that's got to be notarized? So you authorize the chair, I can do that?
Yeah, that's what I said, my amendment authorized the chair to sign it.
Okay.
I just forgot that.
Yep, and I'll still second.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. You're good. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item is stipulation agreement for docket PVR 2016-14 for Clark Hinsdale. Who wants to speak to that?
I do. So, the listers and the town came to an agreement with Clark for a current use allocation. He has 3 that are going to the state. One of these has been settled prior to that, so he dropped it, but we have to sign off on it, and it's primarily just a use allocation. There's just very little value change involved, but we need to say that we agree to it. I think there's something that shows it was like 520, now it's 518.
I saw the number.
Yeah, and it was mostly
520,800 went down to 518,400.
mostly shifting the value to a different part of the property, so to speak. And so it's just a formality that we signed off on this, and I need to have you sign off on it.
So that's a notarized document to be notarized as well, then?
I don't think it needs to be notarized,
Okay.
but I have it here, and I don't know when you can sign it, but as long as I can have it signed, I guess, before the hearing officer shows up on Wednesday for the last hearing.
We could probably sign it right now as we talk about it a little bit.
Okay.
So is there a motion?
Well, I can make a motion to enter into the agreement with Clark Hinsdale, which is docket number PVR 2016-14.
I'll second that.
So you want me to give you that?
Sure, we can sign it.
That would be great.
Is it called a stipulation of agreement? Yes, it is.
So, Select Board just signs this thing, we can just pass it around. Any other questions? All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Okay. This is the time we do public comment. Are there any comments from the public? It's not on the agenda. So we're a couple minutes ahead of schedule. Well, we can do the minutes. You want to do the minutes of August 14th?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of August 14th, 2017 as may be amended.
A second.
Hops has one P, I think. Anybody have any comments to the minutes? Yes.
I had one on line 80.
Oh,
I believe I said that a notice of violation was not issued, but as indicated in the minutes, the zone administrator provided a deadline. So the only change would be just not issued.
So you said line 88?
80, 80,
80, oh, notice of violation not issued?
right.
Ready to-
fine.
You're fine, ready to vote. You okay?
Yeah, I guess I can vote. I came late. I was there.
You can vote.
I have to. Should have
You're the majority. All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye. Aye. So we're just waiting for a couple minutes. We're a little ahead of schedule.
You can do updates.
Yeah, we can do updates. Are there any select board updates?
Fire department has a new board.
The fire department has a new board?
Tom Kozanuk is the new president. And Brian LaBerge is the secretary. And Meg Modley is a vice president. And Frank Costner is still the treasurer. So
What's,
I know that we had talked about a budget, preliminary budget for the fire department, but I asked Dean to stall because we got a new cast of players. So,
okay. So when did we have the budget?
That's on the agenda at about 8:50, so maybe we could talk about that then.
Oh, we can talk about the scheduling of the budget reviews, oh, at 8:50.
Right.
Okay. Just to review the accuracy of our upcoming meetings. So we have,
There's a review for 2 employees tomorrow at beginning at 2:30.
okay,
Wednesday, there's a meeting with the library board of trustees at 7 o'clock at the library.
yep,
And Thursday, there's a meeting to review 2 additional employees at 1:15.
okay,
And then we have to schedule a last review.
okay, we can talk about that toward the end of the meeting.
Yep.
Okay. Then the next regularly scheduled meeting is the 11th of September.
Right.
Okay. Any other updates?
I think that's the only significant one. I mean, the library's the other thing, and we're gonna hear about that Wednesday night, so.
Anybody expecting anybody that's not here?
Yes,
Yeah.
but they won't be here on time.
There's some seats in the front there.
Since the heart of this discussion may be pesticides, are the state pesticides folks here yet? No?
So I can check in on that.
Yes.
We had a note from Matt saying that the decisions on the pesticide was above his pay grade. they would have to have policy discussions.
I believe they're planning to be present, so we can
Oh.
talk about that over.
Oh, he told us
No, they
Matt
told us
Wood
that
told
they
us
would
that.
not specifically.
Patty, Casey, and Carrie.
A couple hours ago, they said they would be here.
Harry Jaguar, I understand, is giving us as a speaking engagement at 6 o'clock. He's then going to run down here and join us, and then he's going to run back for another speaking engagement at 8 o'clock.
8:30, he'll leave here, he'll be here for 1 hour.
So he'll be here, and Heather Darby is en route from Arlberg as fast as her truck will carry. She was last seen somewhere, sighted somewhere in South Europe. So they're on their way.
Well, why don't we start at 7 o'clock? I want to say a couple of things as we get started. We really would like a civil discussion. We really want to give everybody a chance to talk and respond, various things that are said. I would like to see a hand. If you would like to speak, the chair will recognize you. Let's not have side discussions. We will speak when the chair says, go ahead, it's your turn. And the response is the same. VCAM is recording this. This will be available for view later on. We have a microphone which will capture the discussion, and after someone speaks, we'll hand it to the next person, so there'll be, a gap of 5 to 10 seconds, which will allow, to get your thoughts together as we go from point to point. So we've pretty much cleared the evening's agenda. We have it scheduled for an hour and a half, but in fact, it can go longer. We have somebody on at 8:30, but she recognizes she could be late, so we're willing to do that. I understand the pesticide folks only have an hour. I did not want to lose their expertise in the discussion. So I wanted to get into the meat of it pretty quickly. The other thing I wanted to say is the Select Board is having this hearing, this discussion, at the request of the neighbors. To the best of our knowledge, we do not have a role in this. The land is conserved, and the oversight of the land is the Vermont Land Trust. So the Vermont Land Trust will manage the use of that land. And I've seen a letter here that says that growing of hops is an authorized agricultural use. The second point is that the Department of Agriculture monitors the agricultural practice of what's being done. So I was hoping we really don't design this plan tonight. The pesticide plan has not been completed. The water usage plan has not been completed. Peter Briggs and Julian Post are working together. They're trying to be good neighbors. They're trying to abide by the regulations, and we, the Select Board here, are here to facilitate that. And I think as we get into this discussion, I mentioned I'd sort of like to keep the technology at the 30,000 foot level. Let's see what the issues are, so that when the folks, the technical experts, go back to their writing of their plans, they can bring in, as an expert in the community, they could be invited in. But I hope we don't try to design the plan tonight. I mean, the state of Vermont, the VLT and agriculture have the authority to approve and disapprove what proceeds. And I'm hoping this is not a negotiation. I mean, is it a 250-yard buffer or a 250-foot buffer? I mean, we're not here to negotiate. We're here to listen to the concerns, as I see it. So, is this groundwork make sense to you, the civility And I was going to give Julian 5 or 8 minutes to talk, and I understand somebody in the neighbors would like to talk. And I would hope you could keep it brief. If it's a half an hour presentation, then we lose the experts. I'd rather see the dialogue from the community on what their issues are rather than a scientific presentation, frankly, from where I'm sitting. So comments before we start? Yes, Peter. Oh, and when you speak, say what your name is. Say if you're a neighbor, you're a resident, if you're from the state, say who you are, who you represent, if you're a consultant, etc. So we can have this orderly flow. And I'm hoping the state folks, when they're here, that might be,
This is that right now.
okay, arriving, they can provide some of the expertise. Once again, not designing it, but at the higher level of what the plans are. So you had an early comment before we get started, Peter?
Yeah, Peter Schubart, 152 East Thompsons Point Road. My understanding was that the purpose of this meeting was to determine whether the hops operation as we've been made aware of it is in conformance with the town plan based on the issues that are raised, and whether the select board would consider engaging the town attorney to make determinations as to that issue.
I understand that. That's not our purpose here. We will be taking no action. We are here to listen. There's nothing before the board to cause us to take an action at this time. If Vermont Land Trust and all the process they go through and the plan, it might boil up to the select board, but at this point, we're not planning on taking any action. So, why don't I give the floor for 5 or 6 minutes to Julian to kind of outline what you'd like to say, and then the same with the neighbor. I do have a timer, so I'd like to see if we can get into the meat.
And a hammer.
And a hammer. This makes a lot of noise. So the other thing, a select board, if it gets out of control, the select board has the authority just to adjourn the meeting and stop the discussion. So it's kind of the threat here. We have the noise, the hammer, and the threat of adjourning. So we'd like to have a good meeting and see if we can educate ourselves. So, Julian, would you like to take a couple of minutes?
Sure. Okay, so I'm going to keep it pretty simple in terms of visuals, but we just wanted to include some pictures to show what this is going to look like when it's a hop farm. So these are pictures that I took in July on a trip to a hop farm in Michigan, and there's kind of more zoomed out. So I want to give a little bit of background for kind of, you know, where we're coming from. I studied agriculture in college. I've worked on various farms in Vermont, and for the past 3 years, I worked for the University of Vermont, doing research on a number of crops, although my focus was on hops. And I managed our research hop yard in Alberg. And I feel really lucky to have done that because not only did I learn about growing hops, but I also learned a lot of practices, general growing practices that I'm really proud of, which would largely fit into a category called integrated pest management, which means that we manage pests and manage disease with all kinds of different tools, which include spraying sometimes, but also include everything from, you know, at the very beginning, plant selection, where we place our plants to promote good airflow, drainage to keep the growing environment dry, to using disease forecasting with weather models that will predict when we have a favorable disease event, so that when we predict that there is not going to be an event, we don't have to do anything, and encouraging beneficial insects that fight the bad insects so that we don't have to. So we are really excited to employ those practices. That's kind of a big part of why I like farming, is using all those things. And so I know that, you know, the big issue here for a lot of people is pesticide use, and I completely understand why you're all concerned about that. But I want to say first that it's not the focus of our disease management strategy, although it is an important piece of it. And we can go into this later, and Carrie can speak to this, but I'm a certified pesticide applicator, and my job is to follow the rules of the label, and I will do that. So just, you know, people have been talking about kind of what the hops will look like in winter. So this is a new hop yard that doesn't have hops strung up yet, so that there's an idea of what it looks like.
And those are the same poles, actually, correct?
Yeah, these are right. For the supplier of these poles is likely the supplier that we'll get our hop poles from. And this is a picture of a hop yard in Bavaria or somewhere. I don't know where. But this is Peter's inspiration for all this is that he drove by hop yards all the time when he lived in Munich and in Prague. And this is totally subjective, so everyone can have their own opinion, but he thought it was quite beautiful, and that's one of the reasons why he wanted to see a hop farm in Vermont. So this is views, and we've covered this a lot, so I don't know that we really need to go into this. This is a map that was created by Waite Heindel Environmental Management, and they have looked into water, and Craig can speak to that later if people have questions about that. It also gives you an idea of where the hops are going to be planted. So you've got, you know, with the 50-foot buffers, and you've got a main section here, and then this north field here.
Okay, thank you. A few minutes from neighbors. Somebody wants to say?
Just 1 second.
I guess someone wants to say, I'm not a neighbor.
Name, please.
Nick Coles, Shelburne Orchards. I just want to speak about my experience. Have 100-acre apple orchard. It's probably similar agricultural use as what Julian's trying to do. And I know there's concerns about pesticides. I have neighbors all around me. I have my own home in the middle of the orchard. And for 40 years or longer, my family's been doing it. And we have come a long way as far as pesticide use, just in general. All the extension services, all the agriculture, the whole, everybody's doing so much better as far as what they're spraying, how they're spraying it, when they're spraying it. That there's so much more integrity just in general in the industry. Julian is someone who has incredible integrity, and we've, in the orchard over the years, I have my family, my wife has horses in the orchard. We're able to time sprays for wind drift. We're able to time sprays for when it's calm. Often it's in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning, if that's what needs to happen. We do what needs to be done in order to protect not just neighbors, but ourselves. And I know I watch people come to the orchard, move in nearby the orchard over and over again, and there's huge concern and worry about it. Within a year of being there, the concerns fairly completely fade away just because it's a non-issue, because there is integrity. If it's done with integrity, it can be done, in my experience, it can be done very conscientiously and safely. And I think with Julian, you've got someone that you're not going to always find somebody like that. If he doesn't end up putting his hop yard there, some other agricultural use could come in that could be not as conscientious and with as much integrity. So I'm in big support of him.
Thank you. Did you folks have something you want to say? Okay.
Yep.
You'll make it
Yep.
5 to 8 minutes, something like that? Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Linda Samter. I'm 95 Big Oak Lane. And first of all, thank you very much, Select Board, for this opportunity. And I'd just like to say that we as a neighborhood are here as a group, and we have compiled our concerns as a group, and I'm helping to voice those. We are definitely in support of farming. That's never been our issues or concerns. We have obviously certified organic farms and organic farms around us, all through the neighborhood. So my background is I have a natural resource degree from Cornell University. I have a natural resource planning degree from UVM. I basically have spent the first half of my career in environmental consulting. I've actually worked for Heindel and Noyes doing hydrogeology work and contaminant work. I was the environmental health and safety manager at General Dynamics, and I spent a long time there. First half of my career, second half of my career, I've taken that knowledge, and I've also done air quality testing as a consultant. That was a part of my career. And I've taken that to be a green building consultant and licensed architect. So that's who I am. So we would like to talk about the concerns, and basically the information is compilation. These are the issues we'd like to talk about. I'm trying to go through them quickly, obviously, in interest of time. And so as we stated on our letter, that we are asking Select Board to help with legal counsel to review the hops farm because we're looking at the town plan, and we have identified the goals of the town plan that talks to health and safety of the public. It talks to maintain the environmental integrity of natural resources with high public value. It talks to preserving the town's unique environmental and cultural resources. So there are aspects of the town plan, go to the next, more specifically talking about the compatibility of agriculture operations with residential, talking about water issue or water protection and groundwater protection, and specifically also surface water, Thorpe Brook, which is a significant resource to this town. It's been studied and protected for years. There's been agencies and nonprofits that have worked there. Also, we know, the Vermont Land Trust we've talked about, they have purposes of their plan and their grants. They have conservation easements. They talk to productive agriculture as a goal. They also talk to preserving scenic and natural resources, improving the life of Vermonters, and maintaining, for the benefit of future generations, the characteristics of the countryside. So these are the goals. They include all of that. The easement is including the purposes of the plan. I know we were all there at the site, but we just want to kind of show that, the Mount Philo hops is in pink, and it's surrounded by residential in orange and the organic farms in the light green. So it's really right in between everything. There are 3 bus stops where kids are there daily, and there's, as I said, it's very close proximity. There's abutting land uses that are residential and farms. So talking about pesticides, we know that this is the utmost concern. IPM is a standard practice. We know that, and it's responsible practice. It's economically sound farming practice, actually. We know it includes the virus-free stocks that Julian has spoke to, the airflow, water management. All those are wonderful and good, obviously for hops production. But we know that IPM will require spraying, and you've just mentioned that yourself. And we know from UVM extension research that downy mildew is a significant issue in the hops in the Northeast. So we know that downy mildew is an issue, and you yourself said that you have to be dealing with it when the conditions of the weather are favorable for downy mildew. Well, the research shows that's basically 40 to 50 days of the growing season, so it's pretty much every week potential weather conditions support downy mildew infestation. And even though if you don't start in the hop yard with that, it's very likely it could come in. That's the research, at least, that we've looked at UVM and other places. So we just want to show that, that we know the hops grow to 18 feet tall, and so our concern is the close proximity of those sensitive areas to the spraying height. We know that wind increases with height, so even though it's a few miles per hour low, it's going to be obviously higher or more top. We know the area, we live there, and so we know the weather conditions are very variable. And we know that, the use of an air blast sprayer, which is to disperse the pesticides, this is actually an air blast sprayer in a hop yard, and as you can see that they are known that even with the perfect application, air blast sprayers, the research has shown, it does cause pesticide drift. That's throughout the research. So these are some areas, some applications that show both the spray, and then as you can see on the outside, there's still the zone of the drifting pesticide that does occur. Yeah. So going back, why are we concerned? Well, we are in close proximity. I mean, we are 50 feet. They said they're 50 feet away from where we use the roads. The kids are there, the school buses. Our properties are right there. And so we have 29 children in the neighborhood that are always outside. We're right there. You can see, in fact, this is our school bus stop on Big Oak Lane, and right behind is the hop field. This is Palmer Lane. The kids right next to here will be the hop areas. We also have at least 5 individuals in the neighborhood who are immunosuppressed or have respiratory asthma illnesses. That's who we are as a neighborhood. And I'd like to pass over the microphone to...
Hi, thank you. I'm Erin Keurig. I'm an internal medicine physician, and I have a master's in public health, and I live on Big Oak Lane. In the interest of time, I'll make this as short as possible, but I'd like to just present a quick summary on the impact of pesticides that they have on human health, that we know the impact is greatest on those with chronic exposure, in which children are actually more susceptible. This matters in our case because of the pesticide drift, increasing our risk of exposure and increasing specifically the chronic exposure. In the last 20 years, there have been more than 7,000 articles published regarding the effects of all pesticides on human health. The largest body of evidence supports the association of the risk of cancers and neurodegenerative disorders. For the interest of time, I'm just going to actually touch base on a couple of these, which include leukemias and lymphomas. Numerous studies have all concluded that the increased risk of pesticide exposure is one of the important causes of leukemia. Numerous studies have also found an association with increased risk of children with leukemia and their exposure in the residential communities around agricultural. Another is brain tumors. We've seen a few deaths recently in our community of those with brain tumors in our children as well as a young adult. Those with childhood brain tumors of all cause of increased exposure. There's a 3 times higher risk in children and whose fathers have been exposed to pesticides. Also, neuroblastoma, again, multiple studies showing the correlation. Parkinson's disease, specifically, there have been more than 70 studies published that demonstrate a clear correlation between the concentration of pesticide, the increased chronic exposure, and the development of Parkinson's at a young age. These are just a few examples. Others that found correlation between adult brain tumors, multiple myeloma, Alzheimer's, ADHD, diabetes, as well as end-stage renal disease. Because of this body of evidence supporting the chronic exposure, preterm birth defects, cognitive disorders, pediatric cancers, cognitive deficit, and asthma, the Academy of Associative Pediatrics has recommended restricting spray zones and increasing buffers at schools and sensitive areas. The body of literature and the evidence supporting the link between pesticide exposure is so huge it cannot be ignored. And because of this information, we as a community are requesting a minimum of a 250-foot buffer from sensitive areas to decrease our chronic exposure to pesticides, and therefore decreasing my community's risk, my children, and my future grandchildren's risk to brain tumors, neuroblastoma, leukemia, lymphoma, diabetes, multiple myeloma, ALS, Alzheimer's, asthma, diabetes, and more. Thank you.
So I'm going to go quickly. We're on the site walkthrough. The other sensitive areas are the certified organic farms. This is the one to the west, and we have, of course, houses as well, residential areas right in the area. And then we also have 500,000 bees right adjacent to the property, and we know that they are threatened pollinators. There's also another at least 1 million bees in the general half-mile vicinity of this hop farm. And we also, as the sensitive areas we looked at today, obviously livestock areas and the proximity of wildlife uses the area and children. So why are we concerned? We are looking at what is an adequate buffer, because that is what the research is supporting. Keep going. The 50-foot buffer distance between the spraying operations and where we are as a neighborhood and our farms, which add value-added products that obviously have an economic concern as well, it's inadequate from pesticide drift. We're looking at the scientific research that talks about a 250-foot buffer. The EPA has put a position statement on pesticide drift. They have a zero tolerance for drift. It's basically illegal for pesticides to drift off the property. I think Nick talked to that, or others have, or that has been stated. And basically, the way it works, it's the pesticide label talks to that. Label says no drift, no contact through drift, and 250-foot buffer between the spraying and downwind receptors. The pesticides label say it's illegal to spray to sensitive receptors. That's what the label says. 10 and not above 10 miles an hour. Can't spray at 0 because of thermal temperature inversions. This was just taken this morning. This is the temperature thermal inversion that's occurring. That happens a lot. And basically, given the site conditions, we're asking, there's sensitive areas all around. There's always going to be pesticide drifting toward a sensitive receptor, no matter which way you're spraying, because of the shifting winds. So here are the studies. So we looked at, well, where else can we go to get some information on what's an appropriate buffer? The Agency of Agriculture themselves have said that a 250-foot buffer is a recommended buffer. They said regulatory buffers can range from 50 feet to as large as quarter mile, depending on the type of agricultural operation, the abutting land use, and pesticide being used. Homes within 100 feet of an orchard with any vegetative without any buffer could see levels of pesticide on their properties several orders of magnitude above agency detection limits. Given the right set of circumstances, homes close to the orchard, slight wind in the direction of the homes, air blasted application with a sprayer, no buffer, it would be fairly common to detect pesticides on the abutting properties. The agency recommends a well-planned natural buffer of at least 250 feet in width. Trees taller than those in the neighboring orchard should be established along the property boundary, 2 to 3 rows in depth. And they stated that 250 distance is a moderately sized buffer. But let's look at other studies, because the National Spray Drift Task Force is also, they looked at 2,500 spray drift studies, 2,500, and then they conducted their own studies. And they came to a conclusion that from their studies, they saw that pesticide residues for air blast applications extended to 600 feet, and some as far as 1,800 feet. And they also said there's always some level of drift. So we're acknowledging, there's drift. And then these other studies are the same. There's summaries of numerous other studies. And as you can see, it seems interesting that they all have come to about the same conclusion, that somewhere between 200 and 400 feet are the appropriate buffer distances between agricultural operations and residential and sensitive areas adjacent. So that is the studies, that's the research that's out there, and it's all over. So we looked at what did we have for the pole layout for what we were told and given as a pole layout, and what Julian has shown is the green is where the hops plants are, and we know that the studies show up to about 300 feet pesticide residues and deposition will occur from drift. So we said, well, what does 250 feet look going out from what they are recommending for 50 feet? This shows 50 feet from the property lines. The yellow line is where the drift will occur, and as you can see, it's over people's houses, not only their property, but where they sleep and live and are in their homes, as well as the certified organic farms on the west and to the north. And that's just not acceptable. There will be drift, and we know it's illegal for it to go off the property. So it seems that reasonable that to have an appropriate buffer to allow for wind shifting or nozzles not working right, or all the things that may occur even with a proper application, that things do happen. We looked at also, just so we could understand further, if you are, the hops operations across New England, it's a new enterprise coming back. It was around 100, 200 years ago, but in the last 5 or 10 years is really where it's back in New England. So we went through and looked at all different states and looked at the largest operations. So these are new hops operations, and we were saying, well, where did these other farmers decide to choose to locate their hops fields? And as you'll see, as we go through, they're all in remote locations, well over 250 feet away from the nearest residential non-farm home, okay? So this is to the property line, not just the house, but the property line. These distances are shown. And they range from 300 to 1,500, 2,000 feet. So that is showing us that, wow, okay, others are placing them in a more appropriate location. Groundwater supply, we also want to talk about that. We know from information from UVM Extension and others have stated that hops need a lot of water. The data shows 16 to 20 gallons per plant per week. We know it's about 1,000 plants per acre, so the math comes out to about 700,000 gallons of water. That's just from the data we've been able to access, but it seems what we were told at our walkthrough is the 2 ponds, which are 600,000 gallons each, is a 2-week supply if there's no rain. So we're asking, well, we know that they need 700,000 gallons each, so where's the water coming from? And we know from looking at the west pond, we're questioning the adequacy of that pond to supply the water. Next. This is showing the west pond over the course of a month, and as you can see, the water level has not changed. Its evaporation is equaling there's a small trickle of water coming in, and it appears to be that those two are pretty much equal. And that's before any hops are taking any irrigation water is put on plants. And it's also a fact that that's where all the drain tiles are leading into that pond. So it's actually trying to collect all that water, and it's still, that's what we have, is the same level. We have low water supply, big problem in the area. We only have 0 to 3 gallons. The normal home is more like 5 to 12 is what is needed. So we know it's low. This is the data on the water yield. It's around the area. And what we're saying. So this is the low water well yields. So we're concerned about the people with low water well yields. Obviously, there are some along the top that have good supply. They're obviously not as concerned. But as you can see, the majority of the homes surrounding Mount Fallow hops have low water yields. So in looking at the low water yields, I just want to say, if you're intending to get the water from the groundwater, we are asking that you understand that the risk of interference with people's water supply is real. The Vermont state statutes for groundwater is that everyone's has a right. It's the policy of the state that the groundwater resources of the state are held in trust for the public. So we're saying we would like to conduct well interference testing to make sure people don't lose their water. That's what we're asking. It seems prudent to do. And that would be testing around 2,500 to 3,000 feet radius, because that is how you get the right distance for interference. Surface water issues, touch on briefly. We noted that the east irrigation pond, the culvert, it's fed from the drainage that comes from Route 7, as well as the upper field, but it's also the drain ditches that run parallel with Route 7. And so that will collect whatever runs off Route 7, petrochemicals, salt, whatever, will go into that irrigation pond, and also as well as the pesticides that are applied. And then that will overflow and go into the surface water that drains toward Thorpe Brook. Then on the west pond, this is showing the west pond. We know that there's an drainage outlet right there, as well as the channel that will also directly go into the ditch along East Thompson Point Road. And here I'm showing the directions, which is going to Thorpe Brook, which is from the town of Charlotte, is identified as a first priority, significant sensitive natural resource. So, and that goes right to Lake Champlain. So we are asking also about contamination as well, concerns with that. And so in summary, we just are saying that we're looking at a minimum buffer that will protect our families and not to have any well water interference, that also protects our families and our ability to use our homes, and to address water contamination. And we thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is from us.
Maybe we take up the pesticide issue first. Someone from either the state or, the neighbors have just had a chance. Somebody like to speak to that?
I guess I don't want to. I don't want to kind of have a big back and forth on this, but I do just want to represent to people quickly that there are. You guys showed a lot of the hot farms and their proximity, and I guess I would just point out that there are obviously not very many hot farms in the Northeast right now, and so I don't think that they're really a comparable farm to look at. So what I would suggest instead is to look at orchards which use similar technology and similar spray products, but there's a lot more of them in Vermont.
So we're not comparing hops farms to hops farms? Is it?
I can show you hop farms in Yakima if you want, but I thought that, yeah. So either I can show you hop farms in Yakima or I can show you orchards in Vermont.
So are the pesticides similar to what you use for apples versus hops?
Yeah, so I talked to Eric Boyer, is that his name? The other day, who works for CPS, which he works with every apple grower in the state, and he also works with hop growers. And he said that the products we're using are comparable, and he thought since we actually fight fewer pests that we'll be making less applications. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with what the orchards do. Like, I know that Nick is a very responsible grower, but just in comparison, it would be comparable or less frequency. So just at Shelburne Orchards here, you can see, and he's, yeah, I mean, and I don't really, Sunrise Orchards, Adams Apple Orchard in Williston, and you can see there's actually a pretty big couple developments. Chapin Orchard in Essex, Champlain Orchards.
Is that the?
So are these the farmhouses?
It's the farmhouse.
Yeah, we didn't include the farmhouse in this.
Oh, because the farmer is not as sensitive.
Well, let's just, wait a second, let's just make your presentation.
So anyway, I don't really want to spend a lot of time on this, but I just wanted to represent that there are examples of people living in close proximity in what I think is probably a safe way, because these orchards, Hackett's Orchard has been in South Hero for decades. So, and that's all I'll say, and I don't know if you want to.
Susanna.
Well, let me keep control. I would like to ask somebody from the state, they're talking about buffers. Any comments? Is there a standard that you folks use that could provide some guidance here? Identify yourself, please.
Good evening, folks. This is quite a full room. Does this work?
It's for the TV.
Okay. I'm Kerry Jaguar with the Agency of Agriculture. I manage the pesticide regulatory program. And I'm here with my colleague, Patty Casey. She's our groundwater protection coordinator. The person you'll be calling in the next year or so to come and test your water. And we've offered to do that. We're still working through this process. We're in the middle of a very busy spray season as it is, so getting a baseline on some of the wells will happen. We haven't done it yet. But to address your question about buffers, there's really not a standard buffer. For orchards, for corn, for alfalfa, there's not a standard buffer. The only buffer, and it's not even standard, is if you're an organic operation, NOFA requires the organic farmer to maintain a 50-foot buffer from where any prohibited materials are used, whether that's a fertilizer or a pesticide. There are row crop buffers. There are buffers from surface waters, but those primarily have to do with nutrient management, manure runoff. That's sort of what the legislature's been focusing on for the last couple decades with regard to agricultural operations. We get involved. We have a few drift cases we investigate a year. Some inversion cases as well. The current law of the land, I saw the bit about the town plan. The ag-urban, should I just answer questions or keep?
Well, I sort of wanted, let me ask you about the process. So a pesticide plan has not been put together yet. So I believe through consulting with you, with maybe some other consultants, the hops farms folks will develop a pesticide plan. I mean, do you approve that? Are you the, how does that get?
No, it's individual farm management. There's no approval or acceptance of a pesticide management plan. The only requirement we have in statute for anybody to put together a pesticide management plan or vegetation management plan are the activities we permit. Those are golf courses and right-of-way applications, the guardrail folks, the utility folks that are managing vegetation on somebody else's property. They're required to submit a vegetation management plan, and the golf courses do that as well as part of their permitting process. But as far as ag goes, we don't require a pesticide management plan. A nutrient management plan, yes, based on the size of your operation. But a pesticide management plan currently, no.
Jerry, can I ask Alice a question here?
Go ahead, yes.
Please.
Just point you past it.
And you know, we were having a conversation the other day, and sorry, thanks, Peter Briggs. And one of the real concerns I think everyone has is on toxicity. And you know, drift is a real concern, and we can come back to talking about, I'd like to come back to talking about drift and how we manage it. But secondly, is the relative toxicity of what we're doing versus other types of operations. I don't know if you or Heather can comment on that in the context of hops.
Identify yourself, please.
I'm Heather Darby with the University of Vermont.
Yep.
I just wanted to make one comment to add to what Kerry was saying. He said that farmers aren't required to have a pesticide plan, but not everybody can just go out and spray pesticides just for the hell of it. You know, you have to have a license to do that, and you know, to receive a license, you have to go through proper training. You have to continue your training. You have to get education credits. That's all something that's administered through the state. So I don't want people to get the sense that, you know, anybody can just run out and put anything on. A homeowner can do that, actually. You can go to the store and buy anything over the counter. You're supposed to follow the label, but you're not trained on how to actually do that. From a farmer's perspective, they actually have to be trained, or they have to hire somebody that has been trained with the proper training, the credits, the follow-up, so on and so forth. So, you know, please don't get the, sort of the perception that you're just out there spraying without, you know, any care about what's going on. Julian himself has actually received the training, passed the training, continues to get his credits. It's a pretty rigorous procedure. So just to add to what Kerry was saying, they may not have to have a plan, but everybody that's spraying pesticides on a farm has to be trained and certified to do so.
So why don't we take questions, hopefully for the pesticide experts here. Why don't you state your name again and?
Aaron.
Okay.
So my question is, on the EPA label, it does say the guidelines on the label, according to the one pesticide that you gave us, was a 250-foot buffer from sensitive areas. I know there's no enforcement, but that is the recommendation. So how do we address that?
There is enforcement, and I have a field staff. They're all local, actually, and Matt Wood, who some folks have been corresponding with, is your field agent, and we do enforce the label pretty rigorously. That product you're looking at is the OMRI certified product, and if we did, to answer Peter's question, and Peter, I did tell you I wouldn't be ready by Monday, so it's been a busy week. I didn't plan on being here. I'm in 3 or 4 different places today and tonight. But I will put together some relative toxicities using rat LD50 so we can have this conversation. It is the OMRI certified organic product with the 250-foot buffer. You can look at some of the Paraclostrobe and the not OMRI certified products with almost no buffer. So it's product selection. And when my field agents do show up, they grab the label, grab the spray records from the certified applicators. We're required to keep records for years. And the complaints usually come from folks here.
So I guess my question is, with the 250-foot buffer, how is that enforced if we only have a 50-foot buffer between the hops and the property line? And then one statement as far as the testing on animal toxicity. So the EPA, as well as governmental agencies, require the toxicities to be labeled, but those studies are based on animal studies. It's a short-term study of one compound. These compounds often are mixed with other chemicals when they are applied, and the chronic toxicity is not posted on those labels.
Correct, yep, no, they usually do have pay for somebody's graduate work to do those studies, and, you know, occasionally there'll be a flawed study, but over time, hopefully they get that toxicity number right. And even if it changes, it may or may not change EPA's risk mitigation on a label. So there's a lot of interpretation there also on that label. As the state lead agency, it's up to sort of us to decide what is a sensitive area. We've got sensitive areas listed in our regulations currently. That includes schools and surface water type wetlands and wells. I see a lot of hands going up.
So take another question. You've had your hand up, yes?
Marco, Palmer Lane and Charlotte. So to be clear, okay, get up pretty loud.
Why don't you stand up so we hear you better? Okay.
Patrice DeMarco, Palmer Lane. So to be clear, if the label says that you do not apply this chemical if there are sensitive areas within 250 feet downwind, if they apply any chemical that has that label, they would be in violation of the label.
Yes, yep. So,
Okay.
in the field. Yeah. So statutorily, the sensitive receptor, what we're going to use, it may not be the property line.
No, 250
Yep.
feet downwind and where it's spread.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just want to say that, actually, it's on some of the labels as well, but EPA's position on pesticide drift says that they talk to, their position on pesticide drift is that applicators must not allow pesticide spray or dust to drift from the application site and contact people, animals, and certain sensitive sites, including structures people occupy at any time and the associated property, parks and recreation areas, non-target crops, aquatic and wetland areas, woodlands, pastures, or rangelands. The agency believes this is prudent public policy. It sets high but appropriate standards for applicators to protect people and the environment. So that's including.
Yeah, no, and I'm laughing because I actually chaired a committee who put that language together for EPA. So having it read back to you is now I have other questions to answer, right? We've been collectively, states have been working with EPA and pressuring EPA to come up with better spray drift language, and have failed. Every label is going to have something different on it. The actual chair of that spray drift task force is at the Hilton in Burlington right now. I told him I was coming to a public meeting to talk about spray drift, invited him down, and he said if it was for hops, he was drinking a Coors Light, so he didn't care. But anyways, Dave Scott from Indiana worked on that language. We've been working with the Pesticide Program Dialogue Committee for years to try and fix some of the spray drift language. But that said, in Vermont, everybody's concern here is valid. You don't want your neighbor's business on your property. That's your right. Current Vermont law also allows him to manage crops and use whatever crop protection he sees fit on that property. So it would make my job a whole lot easier if that wasn't true. But it's sort of like that's the current law of the land. That's where we are. Individual property rights, you have a right not to be affected by what happens on your neighbor's property, and he has a right to use his property as he sees fit, so.
Yes.
Peter Kahn, Palmer Lane. So what is, essentially we saw a bunch of studies here that show that drift exceeds a 50-foot radius. They have proposed a 50-foot buffer. If we add those two statements together, it seems certain we're going to get drift onto our properties. What happens then? What are the penalties?
Actually, a small correction, and Julian, correct me when I do this wrong. What we've said is where we will put our, what we've said is, I think there's a bit of a disconnect, Peter, that what we've said is this is how far we're gonna put hops. Not that we're gonna spray up to that property and then it goes downwind. The plants are gonna be, we're gonna start the trellising from a distance in from the edge of the property. It may be that prudent practice, and you're the pesticide applicator, not me, will be that you can't spray up to the edge of the property. So, because of the conditions that you're in.
On a
for
certain
instance.
day. So,
Right.
so what you would do is, if conditions were favoring drift, you could spray the north half of your field when the wind is coming out from the north, and the south half of your field when the wind is coming from the south.
How do you test for that? You're in a cab. When the wind shifts every 15 minutes, how would you be able to assess that?
That wood's not there.
Yeah, that wood was there when he knows the frequency.
All I can say is that, that's my job, and so I'll be doing that.
Can I speak to that?
Let's have another person speak, yeah.
My question wasn't actually answered.
Okay, just, Nick, why don't you wait 1 second?
I asked a question on what the penalties are.
Okay, good question, yep.
So we do have a penalty matrix. I'll send it to the chair of the select board here to share with folks. In this case, he's not a commercial applicator. If you were getting the CPS folks to spray, their penalties are higher. And it's basically, for a private applicator, it's less, but it's $1,000 account or $500 to $1,000 account. And as soon as we do an investigation, there's never just one count. So if you violated the label, like you've sprayed in a manner that's conducive to drift, that's, they add up quickly. Generally our penalties for private applicators are $3,000 to $7,000. Our commercial applicator penalties are $10,000 to $15,000, just as the
Per property that's affected?
It can be. It depends on what the AG's office decides. So
With repeat violations, is there
that,
finally
yep. So that's in the. It's sort of so similar to your driver's license. You get a certain amount of points and you lose your license. But there are certain infractions where you lose it immediately. Think of the pesticide laws a similar way. There's only a few folks in the state who've lost their license, their applicator's license.
As far as where you measure on a property, is that right?
Yeah, somewhat.
In other words, I'm just going to talk to my personal situation. I have a driveway we walk down every day, right on the border of the property. And we have a pond that are right on the border of our property, well within a 250-foot drift zone. If we find pesticides there, as I suspect we will, based on all these studies, even with proper application, what happens?
So that's
what we all want to know.
Yeah. So that process. Have you been through it? So your Champlain orchard? Shelburne. Shelburne. Nope, you haven't. The first phone call would be to Matt Wood. He's going to show up. We're not going to necessarily consider your driveway a sensitive site, but your pond probably is.
what's a sensitive site and what's not a sensitive site. That's up to you guys. You decide.
So there's some, yes, yeah, yeah.
Carrie, or Nick, you want to say something?
Well, I just wanted to speak to the, being in the traffic area with the wind changing every 15 minutes. We have telltale all through the orchard, so we're always watching the wind. And it doesn't really change every 15 minutes. It does change, however, and that's how we're able to spray certain areas that are sensitive. We can wait for the wind to change, and we are, my home's there, pasture's there, horses are there, and it's my wife that has the horses, and I'm able to control the sprays and not get any pesticide drift into the pasture, and the trees are less than 50 feet from the fence. So the changing wind has been a friend.
Thank you. Is your hand up, or are you babysitting? Hands up?
I'm doing both.
Okay.
My question is from on agricultural. Will you supply us with test detection kits that we can put on our property? And how quickly do you respond if we do call? It's Derek Chase, electric Chase.
So we don't have kits. That's really not a
Nothing like the MA paper is, the Air Force or anything. My house is 60 feet from the property line.
yeah. So we would use drift cards. It's not a kit, but we can put out some drift cards. And Matt's offered to do that. He's been in contact with Jillian. We'll put out some drift cards. They're moisture sensitive, oil sensitive, depending on the adjuvant used in the product. So we will put drift cards out, and for a complaint, depending on the nature of the complaint, it could be minutes to 48 hours for the field agents, depending on the nature of the complaint. If it's something like a spill on the road, we're there as soon as we can get there. Hazmat doesn't do anything until we show up, so we're there as quickly as possible. But for a general sort of complaint, right now we're in the middle of a 2,4-D drift case. Somebody saw some curling leaves on the neighboring property. We were there that day. So depending on the nature, drift is big. But if it's something that can wait, it does. We've got 4 people covering the entire state for field agents. And they do pesticide, feed, fertilizer, and some of the water quality stuff. So does that help? We don't have kits, but we will.
Okay, so it's just
we'll do some
detection type paper.
Yeah.
Do you need to know what they're spraying?
Not for the drift cards, but we will know what they're spraying. We've looked at a list of hop fungicides. They're slightly different from what the orchards use. Same class of chemistry, but I've got my lab ordering standards now. And I talked with Patrice, the email. So we're going to do a corn herbicide screen first, just to get a baseline of the surface water in the area. There's a lot of corn around. We're fairly good at finding corn herbicides. Atrazine, metolachlor, and a few others are what we'll look for first. Just in the water to get a baseline, and so he can work on the fungicide methods. We will, because they haven't been used, we will do the test before the applications and continue to do the tests after.
But your drift cards will pick up those.
So the drift cards are going to pick up anything that drifts. They're not active ingredient specific.
But so you test those cards specifically for the community, or is there a separate test to know the actual quantity?
Yeah. So we've offered to test water, groundwater, surface water. So the drift cards, that's a positive That's a yes or no test. Sort of like, did it drift is the same as, are you pregnant? You know, you either are or you aren't. It did or it didn't. We can use drift cards. We take those cards, extract what hit them, and run them through the lab.
Other questions, pesticides? Yeah, here's someone that hasn't spoken.
So my name's Rebecca Reno, and I actually live in Shelburne, but I'm friends with a number of people in the neighborhood, so I've become concerned about it. It doesn't make sense to me what I'm hearing from the Department of Agriculture and from the scientific studies placed against that. Why, if there's science that shows that at least a 250 drift is necessary, and if the labels say that, and the EPA says that, I think the Department of Agriculture is really in existence to protect farmers, and that it makes no sense to have this kind of stance where, well, if a problem's reported and we find something, then we'll do something about it. I mean, in this day and age when we know so much about environmental issues, the point is you do something before that about where you cite hazards.
Yeah. And if this is where we would need your help. I have the statutory authority that the legislature's given me, and it does. You've got to jump through many hoops to cite a house. You've got to go through the whole Act 250 process to cite a business. Agriculture's exempt from Act 250, right? So that was a decision that was made in the legislature. That letter that you were citing was written because somebody wanted to put a housing development near an orchard. We were providing comments because we didn't want to be having this conversation after the fact. Since then, technology has changed. Technology's changed. There are different ways to control drift than there used to be 10 years ago, 20 years ago. The air blast sprayers are not, they're falling out of favor because of the ag-urban interface. They're still an effective tool, but falling out of favor. Vegetative buffers do wonders. It mitigates drift tremendously, better than a fence.
Yes, Julian, what's your turn?
I just want to respond with that. We would really like to work with people on locating vegetative buffers in appropriate spots because, like Carrie said, it's a great way to. And again, this is a fail-safe on, first is appropriate application, and then to make sure that there isn't drift, then we would really like to, locate vegetative buffers in appropriate places.
Yes.
Susanna Kahn. In regards to the vegetative buffer, they generally recommend that be at least as high as the crop that's being sprayed. Is that what you're referring to, that it would be at least 18 feet high?
Something that grows that high, yeah.
So before you spray the hops near where there would be a drift, would you have something that was at least 18 feet high to prevent the drift on sensitive areas?
I don't think I can afford to buy 18-foot tall trees.
I don't think I can afford to be sprayed on.
Yes, in the back of the hat.
Jim LaBerge. I'm an ex-dairy farmer, and I've seen a lot of different sprayers. To me, the biggest thing you got to do, and I don't know if they make them anymore, is to get rid of that damn sprayer you want and get a boom sprayer. They used to make a vertical sprayer for spraying the side. You get about a quarter of the drift. You're looking at all the drift, even your photos. It's a huge drift. You can get away with less. It's more concentrated. I don't know if they're still even made. But it seems a lot more sensible than trying to spray with that thing in that neighborhood.
Yes, go ahead.
Patrice, so question for Heather Darby and for Carrie. What special precautions would you suggest for bees that are close to the hops farm? How will we protect them? And what pesticides should they specifically not use that will affect bees?
So specifically the insecticides. Insecticides are going to have the biggest impact on bees. I'm not hearing a lot of insecticides being used on hops, both either Heather or, yeah. And secondarily, there aren't. So there are 76 active ingredients that are acutely toxic to bees. Most of those are insecticides. There may be one or two fungicides on that list, and I'll have to look if I come back. And it might be like the strobilurin mode of action fungicides, like pyraclostrobin is the one. Headline applications out in the Midwest we're hearing about might have an effect on bees, but not nearly the impact that the insecticides have. There's some systemic insecticides that do get used.
This is Heather Darby again. So hops are, first of all, they're not a plant that bees visit. So just to be clear about that. It's not to say that bees aren't going to pass through the yard or be flying through the yard. There, generally aren't pollinator crops also growing in a hop yard. The drive rows and things are kept clean mowed, so there's not a lot of foraging opportunity for bees. But that's not to say a bee might not, sort of fly through the yard at any given time. So again, I think, issues, would be if there was potentially drift again. There's really not that many insecticides at all used in hops, at least that's been our experience. Julien's as well, our insect pests in hops are generally, well controlled by beneficial organisms that we try to protect by not spraying. And again, Julien knows a lot about that, which is really great. It's a great thing about growing hops in the Northeast is that we have a lot of harboring areas for beneficial insects. And we've found over the years of our work that actually not spraying insecticides is far better than spraying them. And again, that's Julien's training as well. We don't know a lot about how fungicides impact bees. There hasn't been a ton of research done. There's been a little bit of research done. Most of that work was done by placing, entire hives in almond orchards in bloom, and then spraying at that time. So, the outcome, obviously, sort of looking at worst case scenario with, I think, a handful of fungicides that are not used in hops, except for, I think, one maybe, or two, did impact the bees. But again, that was in a situation where bees were directly foraging on a crop in full bloom with multiple insecticide sprays. So I think, that the impact on bees would be very, 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 very minimal.
So the bees are close and there's a vineyard right across the street, and it's the same impact that the vineyard's going to have. I thought I saw
The vineyard's got to be like across Route 7.
Across Route 7, that's right. There's a vineyard right there.
Pretty far from our bees.
All right. So, for 2 miles, and I was standing in the hops field and saw grapes. Yes? Okay.
Those are my grapes. If they're on the western field, on the north side of Thompson Point, there are 3 small rows of grapes. Those are grown organically.
And I have grapes, and we don't spray them at all. Will you commit to not using any chemicals that are sensitive, bees are sensitive to?
Let's not have side comments, please. Is there a comment? Anyone else? You just had a turn in the back. There's someone, yes.
Yes.
I think
I can speak loud enough.
Well, it's not for amplification, it's for the television. Or, excuse me, yeah, video.
I want to comment on.
Can you identify yourself, please?
Oh, Mona Schreck. I don't live in Charlotte. We live off Long Point Road in North Ferrisburg. But I think the people, as far as Heather was saying about the bees, I grow hops. These are hops. They're beautiful. Until recently, I didn't know hops had any insect, any kind of disease at all. My hops don't have a speck on them. Bees do not land on hops. The bees are more affected by the people that have local gardens and spray their roses. I have roses. I have 47 roses. I do not use spray because of the bees. The bees go on the roses, and they go on all the other beautiful flowers. They do not go on hops unless, like Heather said, they happen to be flying through the field or something. And if you control the spray, it will not affect the bees. It really won't, because my hops have never been sprayed with anything. And they just grow over my pergola. But I have never seen a Japanese beetle. I've never seen any kind of a bug on hops, because hops taste disgusting to bugs. They're good in beer, but they're not good for bugs. So they were not going to hurt your bees, ever.
Well, you don't spray anything? I'm worried about the spray.
No, if the drift is controlled, as we've been talking about for the whole meeting, they will not affect your bees. I'm just talking about the bees. They will not affect your bees.
Someone else have their hand up? Anything else on pesticides? Yes, Heather.
I think the woman, you made a good point. One of the things that, there's been a lot of talk about fungicides, but I think it's also really important to note that there's a lot that's done before fungicide application is made, and I don't think any farmer really takes that lightly, because not only is it of risk to their families, their environment, the people around them, the complaints they might get, just all these things that are happening now, it also costs a lot of money. And so, the first thing when putting in a new hop yard is buying disease-free root stock. Nobody has to do that, because it's 10 times the price of just buying whatever's out there. And, one of the things I've recommended to Julian, and he also knows from our own experience growing hops, is that you have to buy that disease-free rootstock. Nobody wants to bring downy mildew onto their farm and have to battle that. They won't be successful either. Not only will you not be happy with them, but they will fail right out of the starting gate. And they want to succeed too. As much as you maybe don't want them there to succeed, they want to succeed. And so they're going to invest a lot of money in disease-free plants, which is the first step to keeping downy mildew out of your hop yard. They don't want to battle that. That could kill their plants in a year. So if you really wanted to get rid of them, you could find some downy mildew somewhere and go, sprinkle it on their hop yard. You'd put them out of business really fast. And so we want to keep downy mildew out of their hop yard for years. And that is possible. We know that, spraying can be very, very minimal for 2 to 3 years if they're putting all the other practices into place. And so it's not to say that they might not have to, but I'm just saying that they're starting off on the right foot. They're buying disease-free plants that will come without downy mildew. Okay, so then they have the time to look at scouting. They're going to buy the varieties that are more tolerant to the disease. They're going to be pruning. They're going to be crowning, all the practices that they can do before they pull out that sprayer. And then, the scouting, monitoring the weather. I mean, this isn't like a show where you just run out there and start spraying whenever you feel like it. I mean, this is a high-tech, and it takes a lot of intelligence and education, to run the models, to make sure that you should be spraying when you're spraying, the wind, the temperature, the moisture. I mean, we just don't go out there and spray because, we think it might be there, okay? So, I mean, I just think people should really understand that, it starts with the disease-free plants, the resistant or tolerant varieties. There is no resistance. And then if the disease starts to encroach, the spraying should be very minimal especially in the beginning years, and if they can keep it out as long as possible, it's really not till the plants get, older that they become prone with disease, and probably at that point, they would start making a decision to get rid of them. Because not only do they get the disease, they start to lose significant yield at that point, and nobody wants that. You have to get a yield to make, to have a business, and to make, to make a living. So, I think we're talking a lot about the end, which is spraying a fungicide, but there's a lot that comes before that, and I think it's important for people to really understand that.
Would you live there, within that 50-foot buffer?
Yeah, I mean, I live around farms where I live.
No.
Yes, I would. Actually, I would. I live on a farm. That is my choice, as you said. And we do have a hop yard. And I have kids. I have a little boy who I love more than anything. And the reason I'm saying that, because I wouldn't say that about everybody. I wouldn't say that about every farmer that I know. But I also feel like you actually you're dealing in I've known Julian for a while. You're dealing with somebody that cares, that is going to do their best. They don't want to hurt you. They don't want to hurt your family. I wouldn't say that about everybody. I wouldn't say, yes, I'd want to live next to some of the hop farmers I know, or some of the dairy farmers I know, or the apple farmers I know. Well, that's up to you. I'm an extremely trustworthy person, and I know where Julian lives, and I can take care of him for you later. No, I'm just kidding. But I do feel like you're dealing with somebody who wants to work with you, too.
Carrie has a few words to say.
I've got to run shortly, folks. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm sure we'll be in touch. This is part of the civil process. I enjoy coming and hearing what folks have to say. Because the RAPs change faster than I have a chance to read them, I don't know what the current buffer is. I think it's 10 feet from the property line. The fact that you've got the farmer here listening to your concerns is good. It is good. You're shaking your head, but it's good. We're beginning a conversation here. You're asking for a 250-foot buffer. The agency can't impose a 250-foot buffer.
Federal government did.
For a specific...
For a series, that's all.
So the federal government... so FIFRA 101. FIFRA is the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, Rodenticide Act that governs pesticide law, regulation throughout the country. The federal government does not govern use. That was congressionally given to states. We're the state lead agency. So the decision about whether it's a use or a misuse occurs in Vermont. It occurs local. The regulator from Louisiana might make a different decision than the regulator from Vermont. That's true. Yes, it's the federal label, but it's the interpretation of that label that counts. So what I was saying here is we can't impose a 250-foot buffer. Your town, through their town plan, they can't zone agriculture. They can impose a 250-foot buffer. The only way you're going to get that 250-foot buffer or an other negotiated buffer, whether it's vegetated or what, is through conversations with the farmer. Everybody's in the room, a lot of dialogue back and forth. I've offered to go over the relative toxicities. I know you're concerned about studies, but we've got to start somewhere. That gives an idea about choice, selection, which one would be better than the other. this is your town. You all have to be neighbors. And an open dialogue is the best thing you guys can have. Keep an open dialogue with the property owner, with the farm manager. Voice your concerns. I'm sorry we haven't been able to address them. I've been bouncing around doing other investigations all over the state, but we will sit down with folks. And I got a list of 26 names. We'll address the concerns one at a time. And I did let everybody know that tonight would be a hard night to do that, but we are here. So.
Thank you for coming, Carrie. Appreciate it. Thank you. Any last minute questions before he leaves? We can get on a couple of topics. Yes, Peter.
I appreciate this is the most sensitive of a number of topics that have been raised, and one thing I hope you all understand is, first, we do care about safety, and it was part of the decision that went into selecting Julian as my farm manager. This project is being done with the best of intentions, and I was hoping this evening I might get to speak to those some, but I'll skip that. I think the basic intention of bringing a good crop in support of a growing industry in Vermont is self-evident, and the commentary from our neighbors has been that people are not against agriculture in general nor hops. Just the central issue is this jeopardizing the health and safety of people in our neighborhood? And I think that's a perfectly valid question for folks to raise. We care as well, not just because of a liability concern, but because we're neighbors too. It goes two ways. We hold ourselves to a higher standard than compliance. And an awful lot of the questions, and poor Carrie must have to do this every day of the year, is being poked and prodded is exactly what compliance means. And compliance, in my day job, I'm in the regulatory compliance business. This is actually what I do. This happens, agriculture and pesticides don't happen to be my area of expertise, but we always end up talking about the letter of the law and the spirit of the law and what's intended. And what's intended is to keep people safe. And we're going to figure out how to keep people safe. Not because it does or does not comply with the Vermont law, which is different from the Louisiana law, or how federal law is superseded by state law, but in an absolute standard of, are we doing it the right way? Are we doing the right things? I think I have someone who, whatever we determine a reasonable plan is, will implement that plan. And that was part of the basis of asking Julian to be my partner, is that I'm putting my trust in him to protect us and you. Secondly, we've reached out to everybody we know who can give us good advice on how to do it right. And we've talked with Carrie and Patty and Matt about helping us to develop a good plan. Good meaning not just in the, to the letter of the law, but the right thing to do. Can we put the right practices in place? And to hold ourselves accountable to meeting that standard. Likewise, Heather has spent the last 10 years trying to figure out how to reintroduce hops, a historically significant crop, to Vermont at a time when demand is clearly there. And we would love to bring that vision to fruition. And I think she would be eager to, and has offered, including this evening, running down here from her farm, while juggling her own family and farming needs and the deliveries I know she has to make tomorrow and had to pack tonight and probably has to run back to the farm now. She's here because she wants to lend her support to that vision. And so we're going to ask her, and I wanted to say this while Carrie's still here and Heather's still here, because I know they have to go. We're only going to do this with their support so that we get it right the first time. And then we're going to be transparent about it. I know a lot of questions have been asked of us that we've not yet been able to answer. And part of the reason is this is really complicated stuff. And the how you do the farming and the how you do the pesticide planning are iterative. We have to work these out together. This is something that's going to take months for us to do. Good news is we have a winter coming. and we have an awful lot of that time, and we won't spray any pesticides, and we won't have any plants in the ground at the earliest until next spring. So between now and then, we can work with these folks to develop the best plan possible. Part of my interest in doing this wasn't just to start a farm. It was, in fact, to do something I thought was really good, to reintroduce a crop that made sense, that farmers could make money off of in support of an industry that's booming here. You know, notwithstanding what it says in the newspapers, that I'm a New York businessman, that may be true. My family farmed in this state for more than 200 years, continuously. From before there was a state, before there was a country, when the New Hampshire grants were started, the first towns that were started, there were Amsden's farming. And they did right up until I was a young teenager. And our farm went out of business and got auctioned off, stuff out in the front yard, and I thought that sucked. 90% of the farms in the state have gone out of business. We still have a lot of pretty barns to look at, but we don't have many farms. And I'm lucky enough to have one, learned a little something about hops in my time living in Germany and the Czech Republic, and said, hey, we could probably do this back in Vermont. And have the wherewithal to try it out and to experiment. And I found a kindred spirit in Julian, and some sponsorship from Heather, and some folks who can show us the right way on how to do it in a sensible and safe way. That's what we're going to do. And if we cannot figure out how to do that, we will not grow hops on this piece of property. And we're going to... No, this isn't a hobby. This has to make money. This is a job. This is creating jobs right here. This is a full-time farmer in Vermont.
Okay, one at a time.
I wanted to make a statement, and I just wanted to say we are working very carefully with the best folks we can find here and elsewhere in the country to try and do this right.
I just want to say one thing, just to reinforce.
Okay, you had a hand up. Julia, want to?
So I'll start in talking. We've heard about how it's prudent to have good plans and good planning and understand what the pesticide plans are and understand what might be used and what kind of, therefore, distances are safe. And so what we're saying is, does that mean there will be no poles put in until proper planning is done? Because basically where the poles go is where the plants are. And you stated that 20 to 30 acres of poles you were intending to put in this fall. Well, that doesn't give any time for the Agency of Ag to do a thorough review of what pesticides. They talked to and wrote us an email that said that they were looking at doing a nice, thorough, comprehensive planning and that they would have a full year because we're going through this time frame now till next spring. So that does mean that you would hold off from putting the poles in the ground.
Well, can I just yield it?
Sure, why don't you? Yes, go ahead, Peter.
So, honestly, we haven't decided yet whether we're going to put the poles in. We haven't put them in yet. If we put them in and we don't get a plan, I think that's that we find is going to work, well, then that's our risk to do so. But we haven't decided whether we're going to put the poles in or not put the poles in. But putting the poles in is not the same thing as spraying pesticides, and that is our risk as property owners as to at what point we will take each incremental leg of risk. But, you know, go ahead, Julian.
Well, I was just going to say that, I mean, what they're doing at a plan is deciding which products to use. That's different from deciding on a buffer. We don't need to spend months deciding on that.
Who else has their hand up? In the back, someone hasn't spoken yet. Orange top or anything.
I'll be brief. My name is Megan Browning. I work at Burnt Rock Farm in Huntington. We're an organic vegetable farm. And I know we've talked a lot about pesticides tonight. I think that's really valuable and important. I also just want to bring in the perspective of a young farmer. I'm also part of the Vermont Young Farmers Coalition. And earlier this spring, we had the opportunity to meet with Governor Scott, and one of his primary concerns that he talked to us about is the declining population in Vermont. He told us that this is the first year that the population of Vermont is not going to grow. And I think that it's really important to bring this up here because Julian is a young farmer, And nationwide, the average age of a farmer is 55 years old. The USDA predicts that in the next 20 years, 500,000 farmers will retire. So that's about a quarter of the country's farming population. So we really need young farmers, or we're going to lose agriculture in this country. And Julian is coming here to this community and working tooth and nail to start a farm in this place and carry on the tradition of agriculture. And I think it's so amazing that we can all be in here in this room and talk about this together. And I just want to voice my support for young farmers in general and recognize how important it is that we work to support young farmers, because as the state population is not growing, like, we need to find ways to keep people here. And the way we're going to do that is by encouraging young people to live in this state. And if it is this difficult to start a farming operation in Vermont, we are going to continue losing people. And this is a really fantastic opportunity to welcome young people into the state and create jobs and continue the tradition of agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you. Somebody in the front, a new voice, yes.
Jordan Blucher, Big Oak Lane. None of us are against farming, and I grew up here, I left, I came back. We all understand what it's like. A lot of the people in our neighborhoods have raised kids who have gone off. It's not about not helping people start farms. It's about our families and our protection. I don't want to see my kids sick and my grandkids sick just because of a farm that went in across the road. So there's a big difference between supporting farms and supporting young farmers and looking out for our health and our well-being.
Yeah. Gentleman with the baby.
Would it be okay if I address some water issues? I just want to get out of here quickly before she wakes up. I'm Derek Chase. I've lived in Charlotte pretty much my whole life, besides the time I was away with the Air Force. This is Electra. We grew up on Orchard Road. I grew up on Orchard Road. She's growing up on Thompson's Point Road, next to the farm. I'm a realist. Let's be honest, Selectboard not going to really do anything about the farm. They can't. It's not in your purview to do anything. So I have a couple questions for the town on what happens after. So first of all, I have a low yield weld that's within 60 feet of the property line. They're going to be drawing 400, they have the ability to draw up to 400 plus 400,000 gallons a week. Now, when my well runs dry, which most likely it will the town of Charlotte help with potable water for my family? And it could happen to someone else's family until I sue Mr. Briggs for a new well. So that's one question. I know you can't answer now, and I don't want you to take your time, but if you could get that to me in writing later. 2, when my well, or if it becomes contaminated from pesticides, my property's no longer worth the value, will I be able to get my taxes adjusted? Because I won't be able to sell it, so I'll be screwed there. My wonderful life in Charlotte will pretty much be over. And 3, we know pesticides are linked to developmental issues with children. I'd like to know more about CCS's special education plans and CVUs. You know, I got to plan long term. And as Julian and Mr. Briggs has said, farming is hard. I totally get it. And this is some tough stuff, but the problem is Electra and I are the guinea pigs. So he's more than welcome to buy my property if he wants. By all means, run everything out of it, but I'm the guinea pig here. I just want to know what's going to happen when this inevitably goes wrong. Thank you for your time.
Sure, the water comments? Sure, go ahead.
Craig, you want?
I'm Craig Heindel, Wade Heindel Environmental. I'm a consulting hydrogeologist, been engaged by the farmers to evaluate the water source. I live in North Ferrisburg, right down the road. Been living here for 40 years. Been doing consulting on hydrology and hydrogeology for 40 years. I know a bunch of you, have known a bunch of you for a lot of years. I've looked at the situation here. First of all, the likelihood of impacts on the neighbor's well's quality is quite low, I believe. The well logs for the surrounding wells, the drilled bedrock wells, generally indicate somewhere between 120 and 250 feet of clay over the bedrock aquifer. So there's a very thick, very protective clay layer. that is going to mitigate any likely impacts from quality on the bedrock aquifer. The agricultural drainage tiles will also act as a collector there. Obviously, that's going to dump into the surface water. So the question is, what's the fate and transport of the pesticides in the drain tile? But as far as getting into the bedrock aquifer, I think there's very little likelihood. If I lived in a neighboring house with a well as close as Mr. Chase's, I would not be concerned about the quality of that well in proximity to the proposal that's being proposed here. As far as quantity goes, we're not certain yet whether the farm operation is going to need to withdraw any water. And we're in the middle of a water balance evaluation, trying to figure out whether there is enough water from precipitation and that would be stored in the 2 ponds that would provide sufficient irrigation water for those weeks when there may not be enough natural precipitation to support the water demands of the plants. We're looking into that. We don't know the answer to that yet. If an irrigation well is drilled, Julian and Mr. Briggs have agreed that it is appropriate to do some testing of neighboring wells. Even though agricultural irrigation wells are not subject to permitting, they want to do the right thing, and so there'll be some sort of evaluation as yet to be undetermined, because we don't even know yet whether a supplemental well is going to be needed. So we don't, I guess in summary, the water quality issues on neighbors' wells, I feel safe because of the thick layer of clay over the bedrock aquifer. And the quantity issue we don't know yet, but the farm operations will do the right thing there. Is that enough there from?
Yeah, I mean, did you want us to do the numbers at all, what you have so far?
Well, we're still in the middle of doing the evaluations of the numbers. The maps that Julian showed on the plan there, the catchment area for the west pond is about 80 or 85 acres. The catchment area for that's the south pond. The catchment area for the west pond is 20 or 25 acres, something like that. So the total catchment area is on the order of 100 acres. Those watersheds shed to the ponds. Those ponds are very likely to be brim full with water by the end of the spring melt season. So they'll have 600,000 gallons in each pond ready to go whenever they need to start irrigating, possibly late May or June. And then if we look, we have looked at estimates of yield to those ponds in the normal, the phrase is normal precipitation months of each of those, using the daily data from the Burlington, Vermont weather station. If you apply that to this area, there's more than enough water during a, quote, normal year, which is taking the average precipitation in the 30-year period from 1981 to 2010. That's what NOAA calls the normal. It's basically an average of 30 years. There's enough water in those watersheds to provide supplemental water to supplement whatever is needed beyond the natural precipitation. Again, that's normal. There will be drier than normal years. There'll be wetter than normal years, and we're looking at obviously the drier than normal question. We don't know the answer to that yet. We're in the middle of that evaluation.
Greg, a question. We've sized these ponds based on some preliminary work that estimates that Julian did, and then we asked Waite and Heindel to do a more sophisticated analysis of our catchment area. And with the rebuilding of the culvert and everything on the other side of the road, that's sort of kind of new math to the neighborhood. So we're trying to get an updated view on our water availability and our water usage. Water usage, of course, is also a function of how many acres do we actually plant, what varieties. So there's a lot of variables. And again, fortunately, it's iterative of these things, which is why I think Craig's correctly hedging on giving the answer, because we don't have all the inputs. But looking at it on a rough basis, looks like we have water in a normal year without taking water out of wells.
That's correct.
And secondly, if we got it wrong, or we have an abnormal year, what impact does making a bigger pond you know, if we got it wrong, my assumption, and I'm looking for some validation on this, is that we have the ability to enlarge our ponds and have a greater buffer. It's relatively inexpensive to enlarge the pond, and it's something we've thought about doing in any event simply because a bigger buffer, just as with pesticides, a bigger buffer, all things being equal, a bigger buffer is better. So that's not very sophisticated or scientific, but that's how we've been approaching this. So maybe Craig, you can comment to that.
That our hops will not die if they get less water than we want them to. So I mean, there's a range at which they operate, and yes, if there's a super dry year and they don't get the maximum we want them to get, they might not give us as much hops. They will not die. And so, you know, I think the key thing that we mentioned here is that we're going to do this in a responsible way, not in a way that compromises other people's wells. And that should be kind of the end of the question, I think, in terms of people's concern.
Yes, Peter?
Peter Schubart. I guess I'd just say we keep hearing about the consideration for the neighborhood and how thoughtful and planned out the execution of this project is going to be. You know, what we've already seen, we've already seen the west pond rather is too close to Pete Demick's line and was not properly constructed. There's the issue of a hoop barn that was constructed in the setback. So I just make the comment that doesn't inspire any confidence on my part that this is going to be well planned out or well executed, because just in the months they've been at it, we've seen these things and it's clear there wasn't any planning or any proper execution. That's my comment. With the board's permission, I'd give the microphone to Pete.
Sure.
Hi, Pete Demick, Palmer Lane, and I own the Nofa farm next door. Who designed your pond next to me? That's a direct question. Who designed the pond?
That would be the guys who are.
So they have no really design experience in the pond business.
They've dug a lot of ponds, which I would translate.
Dug a lot of ponds. Okay, so when you first built the pond, you made a 100-foot-long spillway that directly went onto my land. And you designed, now hang on, you designed it like that, because you're saying you designed it. If this is a designed pond, then you designed it to purposely put your spillway onto my property. You and I had a lot of discussions about the water. My main concern is keeping your water, which is going to be contaminated, off my land, which keeps me from suing you. I don't want to lose my NOFA certification. So then we went back, and you've dug this nice little ditch so that now when your pond overflows, which Craig says it will overflow, won't it? Yes, it will overflow. So I'm not concerned about the first 2 years. I'm concerned about year 3 and 4 when the copper fungicides are now released during the spring runoff, and they're going to go into the ditch into Thorpe Brook. And they also, because of the way it's designed, in which our road commissioner, Junior, said the first year that overflows is going to take out my driveway completely. And that's because of the increased flow of the water due to the drainage pipes underneath the ground. I'm not done yet. So I just, you know, what are you going to do? You have an ill-designed pond. You have the drainage pipe from the road that is supposed to be the drain tilted back into the pond to capture all the water going down the road. The pipe that's going for the intake is actually dry right now, even though there's water in the system. All that ditch right there, but there's no water coming up there. That pipe, because I asked you, have you ever owned a pipe before on the ground? And you said no. Pipes freeze in the winter. So all that water that's going to try to go into that pipe is going to freeze right there, and then now you've got water going onto my land. Absolutely.
So just quickly about water, regardless of where you put a spillway, if you put it on the lower end of the pond or the high end of the pond, or the side of the pond, when the water overflows from the pond, it's going to go downhill and end up in the same spot. So, no, in a ditch that we created that will go into the town ditch. So, what's that? So, I guess it's simple. So, one, we haven't added any water to the system. So yes, the tiling may shift the balance of when water comes and when water doesn't come, but the net flow of water through our ditch that's next to your property has not changed. And the ditch, as it was before the pond was there, was in worse shape, would you agree, than the ditch that exists now?
During the past 2 years, but I don't agree that the ditch now is even remotely.
But it's better than it was before.
Like by a fifth grader. I mean, you just.
I don't know why you're complaining when the ditch is an improvement over what it was.
There were no chemicals in it.
There's no chemicals.
And there are none. And there are none currently.
Right. What about 3 years from now?
Well,
this is a long-term thing. I plan on living there for a while.
And I plan on farming there for a while and doing it right and not having chemicals spilling into the ditch.
So you're saying that pond's going to be contained? Because you seem to want to allow the water to go into the ditch to drain to Thorpe Brook. Copper fungicides will kill all the aquatic creatures in Thorpe Brook.
The plan is not to keep fungicides in the pond. The plan is to keep fungicides out of the pond to begin with.
Well, how are you going to do that? So we have a fundamental difference then. I don't believe, you're saying you're going to keep the fungicides out of the pond? How do you do that? When they go down through the ground, and you said you were going to use drip fungicides.
No, I didn't.
No, you didn't. But that's okay.
I've never used pesticides through drip.
Wow. Okay, well, we'll let that one go. So you're saying there's not going to be any fungicides in the pond?
That's the plan.
I love a good plan. And I wish I could actually believe that you had a plan.
Okay, someone else had your hand up. Why don't you take the microphone, identify yourself.
Mike Bedell, Palmer Lane. I'm sorry, I just don't understand when you say that you're going to add water. If you can help me understand what that means.
When did I say I was going to add
You just said...
In the area of the pond, you're not adding water. You just have a pond there.
Yeah, so I'm trying to figure out how you add water. You said you're not adding water. Where's the water come from that you're going to add?
It comes from the sky.
So you're not adding water. The fact that it hasn't rained in 2 weeks and the pond's dry, is that what... I'm trying to understand, the only way that that pond gets filled is with rain. There's no other way that that pond's going to get filled.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. I wasn't following when you kept saying you. Sorry.
Yeah, we may decide to link the two ponds, in which case we would be adding water to that lower pond, although the volume is negligible compared to the when the pond overflows, right? It's not going to be because we added water during the season. When the pond overflows, it's in the spring when there's many thousands, hundreds of thousands of gallons more flowing across the land than the ponds hold.
Thank you. You mentioned water going into the town ditch. Do you want to help? Again, I wasn't quite sure what. There's a town ditch?
Yeah.
Either side of the road, there are ditches, which in this case ultimately flow to the brook.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Flows into Thorpe Brook?
Yes.
I couldn't hear your question.
It flows into Thorpe.
Yes, that's right. People have other questions? I have a question. Vermont Land Trust, you're here. Any comments? I mean, you're managing the conservation. I think I've seen a letter saying Vermont Land Trust has supported farming. Hops is a legitimate product. Would you be willing to introduce yourself and just make a couple of comments from the Vermont Land Trust perspective?
Sure. Thank you, Lane. Gil Livingston, the president of the Vermont Land Trust. Siobhan Smith, who's the vice president for stewardship and conservation for us, is also here. Happy to answer questions. There have been, I think, misinterpretations and maybe misunderstanding of the goals of the conservation easement and whether or not the proposed farm complies with easement requirements. There is a statement of purposes as a preamble to every conservation easement. The primary purpose associated with the easement on the former Hinsdale Berry Farm property is to support productive agricultural uses and economically viable agricultural uses. A secondary purpose is to protect scenic vistas and the general natural resources that benefit Vermonters. That's advisory language used to interpret what follows in the easement, which is regulatory in nature. The regulatory provisions which we essentially safeguard are around the construction of improvements on the farm and the potential division of the farm into units. It is not about agricultural practices or the way in which agriculture is conducted on the property. So, for example, we granted a written approval with a map connected to it with respect to the ponds that we've been describing, as well as the hoop house. Any structural improvements require some form of approval or another with regard to that operation. We have a representative of the Natural Resources Conservation Service here, an agency within the U.S. Department of Agriculture who's responsible for a conservation plan that's referenced in the easement, which focuses on highly erodible soils. If folks have questions about what that conservation plan is, what's required in its application to this farm, the NRCS representative could talk about that. The easement is co-held by the Vermont Land Trust, the Department of Agriculture, and the Vermont Housing Conservation Board, as are many farmland easements in Vermont. We're the primary steward, which is why we're here and not representative of those other two agencies. So the approval process sits with us despite that regime. I don't know whether you have other questions or people have questions about the easement.
Yeah, please ask your questions to Gil, sure. Whoever gets the microphone there.
I hear what you're saying, but I don't believe that the second part of the easement is being met by this operation. This is a big experiment, and mistakes will be made as they go along, and as we've discussed tonight, there's no agreement about abiding by a reasonable buffer. And the water quality, we don't know. We don't know where the amount of water that they'll really need after the two ponds, one empty, are used. I don't think, to quote the easement, that this project conserves scenics and natural resources and the quality of life for Vermonters, and to maintain for the benefit of future generations the essential characteristic of the Vermont countryside. I don't think the project as it's going, unless it decides to do the buffers and comes up with water not from the wells around it, I don't think it complies. I think it's an experiment, and I think it would be great if somewhere in Vermont a 35-acre hops yard could be developed that works. But this is not the right place, and I'm wondering when everyone is just going to say, oh, this land does not allow for the buffer and still enough hops yardage to do what we want to do. We really support the idea, but it is not the right place, and it's so risky, and we're all hedging our bets and talking about this and that, and it doesn't make sense. This is a time to backtrack and say, let's reconfigure the plan. Amen.
Comments further? In the back.
Hi, my name is Samantha. I probably don't have any standing with any of you, but I've been working on organic farms for like more than 6 years. I studied organic agriculture in college. To answer your question, that this isn't the right place for it, anyone can always say that this isn't the right place. And, you know, it might be too rough to say not in my backyard, but it feels like that might be what's happening right now. And I just want to say that you guys have been so lucky to have so many people here that are experts in their field trying to give you all of the information that you want. And you can ask them all of the questions that you may have, and they will answer them. And Julian and Peter are going to do as much as they can to address any sort of concerns that you may have. And I just implore you, like, so much to, as much as you possibly can, because I know you all are level-headed people, to come at this from a less energetic, more stable perspective, and really try to, like, get the facts, because you may think that, you know, organic agriculture is the answer, but organic farms spray a lot. And they do, Peter. They do spray a lot. I've worked on, they do spray a lot. That's an incorrect. You live across the road from Shelburne Vineyards. Shelburne Vineyards has grapes across Route 7 from you guys.
They manage those grapes.
Yes, they do. You are incorrect. No, they manage them.
Well, let's just make your...
I just... My point, if you would let me make it, is that whether you have a certified organic farm or a non-certified organic farm, at a larger scale, people are going to be spraying. And Julian is responsible. He cares about doing the right thing. And I just implore you to listen to the experts who are trying to give you their information.
Thank you. Behind you, there's a hand that hasn't spoken. Just wait. Go ahead. Identify yourself, please.
I'm Jeff Martin. I live on Palmer Lane. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. One of the things that was said at the beginning of the meeting tonight by you, Lane, was that Mr. Briggs wants to be a good neighbor. And one of the things that's happened for us, and forgive me if this goes on for a bit, I'll try to make it short, but is that we're a group of small neighborhoods, and most of us have lived many years in these neighborhoods. We've established ourselves. We have our families. We're raising our children. Our homes mean everything to us, as I'm sure they do to you. All of a sudden, we have new folks in our neighborhood. That happens, right? But how people enter into a neighborhood, what their behavior is like from the beginning, speaks volumes in my estimation. I'm a psychologist. I've studied human behavior for many, many, many years. People talk about integrity and honesty. Inherent in everything you're saying tonight is that we need to trust you. In fact, what has happened from the beginning of this project is that we spent, as people living there, weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of heavy equipment coming through, putting down, we didn't know what. We didn't know what was happening. There was no information at all. Lots of statements about you tonight, Julian. I think that's wonderful. It's good to hear, frankly, because one of the statements that you made to the Citizen newspaper was that you have made every effort to meet with people one-on-one to talk about this project. My property borders the southwest field. In all of this time, 3 or 4 months now, no one has come to my door or called me to say, you talked to me when I approached you on the road.
We talked to you earlier on Mike Bedell's property.
Yes, because I was wondering who was looking in my neighbor's windows, and you told me that there was a hops farm that was going in, which was fine, and one of the things that you said in that conversation was that you would become, the two of you would be coming forward with information to us. That didn't happen. It did only happen when, in a concentrated form, when you were invited to come and speak and explain what your plans were to the neighbors some weeks ago. And by that time, a lot of things had already transpired. My one-on-one conversation with you was about the fact that there was a lot of heavy equipment going over our road, And I was concerned about the integrity of the road and some tearing up of some of the area next to the road. And what you said to me was, you only have an easement on this road. This property doesn't belong to you. We can do whatever we want to do with this property.
I don't think that's the way I said it to you.
I honestly believe that's how you said it to me. But I'm not here to cast dispersions. What I am here to do is to say that you're wanting us to trust what you're saying tonight, and we're looking at a relationship of many, many years going forward. In my personal opinion, I don't think this has gotten off to a very good start because of the lack of communication and also some of the defensiveness that I feel has been met. And I don't know how things are going to transpire as we continue to go forward, but I think that, and this discussion is really, it's terrific that this is happening tonight, but there are a lot of, as I've said to you, Julian, we live there. This is where we are 24 hours a day. Our kids are there. This isn't about not supporting farming. Frankly, I find that a bit insulting. This is about being careful about how do you balance, and this is what the town plan says you're concerned about too, how do you balance the well-being of citizens in this community with many things, including enterprises that can impact quality of life. So my point is that while some folks have relationships with you established and believe in who you folks are and that we should trust what you have to say to us, I believe that integrity and honesty is built through visible, demonstrable action. And we've had 3 or 4 months of a lot of activity and frankly very little communication without us soliciting that information from you. So I'm hoping that amongst many other things that happen going forward, that shifts. Because if you want to be good neighbors, I'd like to think about what does that mean? That's such a generic, nice statement, but what does that really mean? It needs to break down into specific actions. And I'm hoping that we see some more demonstrable concern that's really demonstrated, beginning with good communication. And I think, finally, and I'll finish by saying, really understanding in your heart what our concerns are and not putting up a wall to that. Because it's a red herring to say we're not supportive of farming, we just don't want new people in the neighborhood, whatever it might be. We've been living next to farming. Those fields have been, the field next to my house has been planted almost every season. I'm used to manure and I'm used to big combines, and I'm used to all that stuff. And that's absolutely great. I come from a family of farmers. But this needs to be different than it has been, because frankly, the first few months, in my estimation, have been a poor start.
Julian, you want to respond to the comments there?
So I will first say that I do think maybe the biggest mistake we've made so far is not personally knocking on every single person's door in the neighborhood, and I wish we had done that. We started doing that, and the reason why we were on your neighbor's porch is because we were thinking about his view, and you know how he would feel about that, and we did knock on his door before we just started looking, and he wasn't there. But I guess so we. I look forward to hopefully having a personal relationship with each of you, and I agree that it's been off to a poor start. I also feel like we have provided a lot of information to you, and I think you have to recognize that there are 2 of us and there are 29 of you, and I can't be thinking of each of you all the time, but I can tell you that I will share my cell phone number with you and my email address, and if you reach out to me, about anything, I'll respond. And we, although we failed at the beginning to get that message to everyone, we did go to the town clerk's office right at the beginning and leave our cell phone numbers, and we tried to do that, but we obviously failed at reaching the main or the whole group.
Steve in the back, Kiernan had a comment.
Thank you. I really appreciate the select board having this meeting tonight, and I'm really glad that the communication conversation has come up, because I live across town. I don't really have a dog in the fight about the hops farm, and I don't really know about the details. But I've been really concerned about the communication, and I agree. I think that the communication so far has been terrible. And I may lose some friends by saying this, but I put the vast majority of the responsibility for that on the neighbors of the hops farm. What I have seen just by looking at the communications that have come through Town Hall, what's been on Front Porch Forum, and what's been in the media here, is you have a guy who is saying we don't have all the answers yet. We're hiring a lot of experts to get the smartest minds we can on this. You heard him say again tonight what he said before, if it can't be done safely, we're not going to do it. And that's been one side of the equation. And the other side of the equation has been every media outlet that you can see, he has been vilified and criticized and every kind of aspersion cast on what he's planning to do. And some of it has gotten completely crazy. There are pictures on Front Porch Forum that say, you know, East Thompson's Point Road and hops right there, when we know that's not the view or the plan. We saw a post about that dogs can get sick if they eat hops, which, you know, is also true of chocolate, but I don't see anyone saying we should shut down the store for selling candy, right? It's gotten in the realm of fantasy, right? When we see interruptions of the guests who come here and have all the duties they're doing, and they're just trying to answer questions and they get interrupted, or a young person's just having like her basic facts question, or someone interrupting when I'm talking here right now. I know that's not the kind of neighbors I've had. The neighbor I have is somebody who sprays his apple crops. And my children and my pets and my garden and my water are fine. Are fine. I've been there for 14 years. Never one speck of a problem. Because the guy gets smart people working with him and he's careful. He sees the wind at his friend. As his friend, he pays attention. He does a good job. So I'm not saying you shouldn't have concerns about what this is going for, how this is going forward. I don't know about the pesticide, fungicide stuff or the water solution there. But I do know who, as I watch how people have behaved, the neighbors of the hops farm and the guy who wants to build a hops farm, I know which one I'd rather have living next door to me.
Yes, in the back. Patrice. It's you, Patrice.
I love Nick. I lived next to Nick for 12 years. I could smell and taste the pesticides, and I'm not blaming Nick, and I never thought about it until tonight. But my father died of Parkinson's last year, and my mother's been diagnosed with bronchiectasis, was a chronic lung disease, which she has, according to her doctor, no reason to have. So I hope you stay safe.
Anything more anybody wants to say? I think we appreciate everybody's conversation. We've had experts here. Hopefully the communication will be better. I assume Peter and Julian will proceed and keep neighbors informed as you develop your plans and work with the professionals, and I guess we go from there.
We invite direct discussion. That's what we would prefer rather than doing it through email and the press. What we rather do.
I mean, I think to be clear is that every single media outlet has come to us. We have not pursued media.
That's very true.
Yeah, that's just not.
I made that point to you earlier. The media came to us. We did not call them.
I have not called back
I know
people
Julian,
that have called.
That's the truth. And you guys were interviewed first. They went off Front Porch Forum. We did not seek it out. We're not. That's.
So I mean,
they do what they do. I don't know what their world.
Okay, well, let's move on. We have to go on the next item on the agenda. Thank you all. Hopefully, everybody feels better informed.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think Linda left.
That's good.
We're going to go on a minute. That was a good presentation. Good presentation.
Thank you for doing what you do, too.
Thanks. See what happens. Take a 2 or 3 minute break. This thing's clear. Was that yours?
Oh my gosh.
I can't hear you. We have more on the agenda, yes. Thank you. Gail, thank you for coming down. Appreciate it.
Great fall, Nick. See you later.
Thank you, Heather.
Thanks for inviting me.
Gail, it's also a pleasure to see you. Okay, let's have the conversations outside. We do have more of an agenda to go through. Thank you, guys. Okay, where are we, Dean?
We had Linda Radmer. She asked for it to be rescheduled.
Okay.
And so Chittenden Unit for Special Investigations, intergovernmental agreement for a 3-year agreement. Chittenden Unit for Special Investigations investigates child abuse, and we've had an agreement with them in the past. They basically have a prorated cost that they split between towns based on population. So we pay them I think in the past couple of years it's been around $7,000, I believe, a year.
Didn't it go up this last year?
It did. There was a year when it jumped.
A year dropped and
yeah.
then.
Okay, it's in our packet, okay. So we're going to, what is our objective here?
This is a new agreement for the next 3 years, starting in
How many years?
3.
Are we committing to the financial part for 3 years, or do we do 1 year at a time normally?
We do, yeah, we do budget 1 year at a time. The agreement does, I would say, bind us to a 3-year allocate, 3-year payment.
But we vote on that, I mean, we have,
Yes.
we're not obligating future years. We're obligating ourselves to
Kind of are.
Yeah, kind of are.
CUSI.
Kind of are, but we're kind of not supposed to.
I mean, we should review it each.
We do review the actual amount each year, and if we, I think there was a year when you actually did approve less than what they asked for.
So we can agree to a 3-year contract, but it seems to me our motion should approve the next year budget only.
Then it probably would be a different agreement.
Okay, so how does the board feel?
Well, I think it's a good unit, or we have to do it. And it comes up every year.
The amount does, yes.
Yeah. And how much is it going to be for the next 3 years, each year?
They didn't actually tell us.
Oh.
It's, let me just look what it was this year.
Well, I'm not interested in committing to an open-ended contract. There's no estimated amount of what it's going to be per year. That's like,
It's bad enough to get a vote for 3 years in advance. It'd be nice to know what it's going to be.
It was 7,000 this year. The town approved 5,700 last year. The year before that, it was 7,000 again. and the year before that was also, no, it was just 7,000.
It was just that 1 year that it went down.
Right.
Why was that again?
My memory is, well, I have to say my memory's shaky on that, but
Yeah.
I think the select board just said we're going to pay less.
Remember, we had a meeting with them and they told us it was going down that year.
Okay.
That's what I can't remember why it went down. Maybe they gave that cost to another town that year?
Yeah, I can't remember.
It says it should be agreed upon with a payment schedule, but I don't see one.
So it seems to me we're gonna have to wait until we see a payment schedule.
That's under section 6, 1, 2, 3, fourth paragraph. Notice the financial contribution should be made in advance by the Chittenden unit for payment in accordance with agreed upon payment schedule. We don't have one.
Okay, then we want one.
So we're gonna pass on that till we get it. Okay? Thank you. Oh, okay, next item?
Next item is the budget review schedule. This was, I'm just going to bring that up, approximately. This had been discussed at the all committees meeting, and then Mary indicated or suggested that she thought that it was basically starting too early. There are a few committees that have indicated they're able to provide their budget, at least their initial budget, on September 11th. Some, as Fritz said, CVFRS would like to be pushed back due to a board reorganization.
I think you should say Nicole would like to present her budget. She talked to me. They've worked it out.
True.
With the committee. She's like to do it before she takes time off.
Right.
So she's ready to go.
She's ready to go.
Charlotte Lantress, and we hear that they're ready to go?
They are. The Recreation Commission would like to have a separate meeting from the recreation operating budget to talk about recreation facilities. Bill Fraser Harris is out of town on September 11th, so he'd like to come back on September 25th to start that discussion.
And when's the baby due for Nicole?
October 3rd or 10th, let's see.
I'd like her to be here.
October 10th.
I'd hope that she could be at that September.
She said she would be as long as she's not
Oh,
early.
she hadn't, okay.
So you're saying the recreation program budget and separate that from which part?
The 25th, recreation facilities.
Oh, okay.
Capital
Those would
reserve.
be two separate discussions.
Correct.
So we have to separate them since Bill is going to present on the 25th. So everybody okay with trying to commit to the 11th of September?
Right. I believe most of those will be ready to go. There may be, I'm not entirely sure the Conservation Commission is ready. I haven't received a confirmation from them, but I believe it would be everyone else would at least have a first pass at their budget.
So everybody's okay with maintaining, it's kind of what we wanted to do. We talked about this quite a while ago, that we wanted to start early. I think, Fritz, one of your comments was, I think the Wildlife Refuge, you wanted to make sure they had quotes, they hadn't in the past. I think one of your thoughts was that make sure they're on the right track, and thus that we want to do them early.
An opportunity for those to come back, that if
Right.
we seem to be at the last minutes accepting it or not. And
Right, right.
So, yeah, I mean, like I'd keep the park and wildlife on the 11th.
Okay.
I mean, there's some that should go earlier and some that probably
Could go later.
could go later.
What about Lewis Creek Association? When do you want to see them?
Well, they're up there for the 11th.
You want to keep them on the 11th?
Let's stick with the plan. I know Mary thought some of these were a little early, but, I mean, if they are ready, let's hear what they have to say, I'd say. Keep the schedule that we have.
Well, I know that the fire department will be
delay
ready the
that one.
25th.
We'll delay that one.
And,
I mean, one of the things I thought that was useful actually last year was to hear about the fact that fire and rescue's payroll and workers and insurance was going to be up. So I don't know if there's a sense of just those big issues, not necessarily you have all the numbers, but what are the trends?
That's something we can give in the quarterly report, which is do you want to do that on that day? I mean, there's one that's due, right?
Right, it's right around then as well.
That's probably, I don't know if the audit will be done by then.
So we're talking the August 23rd then, is that date?
September 25th.
September 25th. Yeah, we could do the first quarter data.
Okay, got it.
Or that would be year end, but unaudited.
Yeah.
So there would be changes, and then it would, and at any time, like I said, whenever it's kind of a running process, whenever something pops up, I guess at this point it's I let you know, because Jon Snow's gone. I don't know. Our new treasurer is off the top of it.
Then it's extra important to start early.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no.
So I think you're gonna reconfirm these groups, but essentially maintain the schedule. And if we have to push things around a little bit, you guys, I assume, would agree.
The CVRF, the fire department want a quarterly report with whatever budget heads up is available.
Yep.
Okay, am I good with that? Okay.
We did some updates earlier. I guess one of the items that I think we have to, well, first of all, Carrie, are you able to make personnel reviews on Thursday at 1:15?
No, I'm not. Sorry.
So that would be for planning and zoning. Do you want that to be rescheduled, or do you want that to go ahead?
I'll let you go ahead. Thank you
Okay.
very much for this time around.
Yeah. And then my review, we can schedule another time.
I'll need to do that on a Monday
Okay.
at 4 or like before. Somehow it's going to have to be on a Monday for the next couple of weeks. It's the only day I can plan.
Could potentially be the 11th.
That I have
or
help.
18th.
11th?
That's
So
fine.
we're gonna keep the schedule you have, except for
Yep.
your personal one.
Yep.
And we'll do that on the 11th.
Okay.
I can't remember, are there packets, are you handing out the?
I'll hand out the self-evaluations beforehand.
So I could have an input but
Yep.
not be there? Right.
Yeah,
See it?
yes. Yep.
Okay.
Well, we always get a chance for an input.
I haven't received one for Nicole yet, which Matt did, so I don't know if he's sent that out or if he's, if I asked him to. But
He met with Nicole.
Yep.
And the other one, I did one for Dean, and I presented it to Dean. I haven't talked about it, but I put one together. Then what we've done in the past is, then we have the larger group, it's kind of what we call 1/1, and then you can make your inputs, and then last year, in the case of Dean, he summarized what our comments were from the one-on-one that I had done. Does that work for you guys? Or you want
Works for me. I mean, we all get an opportunity to
see it,
speak our mind in an executive session at some point in time, so.
Okay. Okay. So we'll do.
I'm sorry that my schedule is kind of a little bit weird these last few weeks and a couple weeks to come. I just, with school starting, and I have a different staff than I've had in the past, so until I kind of get things settled down, I'll be
Better
able to
tell
get
that
on
judge
track.
we want him to straighten out his courtroom and get it done.
No, Judge Mello.
Okay.
And it
Okay.
is the hardest thing I have ever done, because we sit for 9 hours at a time. 7 of those hours you're listening and not talking. And it's just an amazing process.
So we have 3 meetings this week. Everybody's tuned in then. 2:30 Tuesday, that's tomorrow. 7 o'clock is the library. Kind of review of what they're talking about at the library.
On Wednesday.
On Wednesday. And then Thursday, to support Frank's schedule, I think it is 1:15. So we have 3, like 1 hour type meetings, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Okay.
So I also won't be able to be at the library meeting either, but I will call Beth Merritt and tell her myself why I can't be this time around.
Okay. Any other business?
only to adjourn.
Is that a motion?
You betcha.
Do you second that, Frank?
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor, adjourn? Adjourn. Thank you.
Bills and warrants?
I watched the beginning of